I think all of you have joined for sessions before, right? I've seen all of you. Yeah. So we don't have any new faces. It's amazing. Thank you for continuing to come back and show up and just hang out with this salty community before we can, until we can all get back in the water. So you guys have obviously been on some past, sessions, and we've historically done more workshop type things where we're either doing artwork or breath work with Nix or meditation with Justin, and very kind of hands-on stuff. Last week we did an herb garden together. So it's just been really fun to see your progress and have you guys, dig your hands in and do different things together. Selfishly, they're just all things that I want to do and that I've wanted to learn, but I haven't prioritized the time. And so it's like forcing me to just carve out the time to do it. So it's actually come pretty naturally. Cause I'm like, gosh, I really want to start an herb garden. And why is it taking me so long to do this? So I'm like, I'll just do it as a weekly session and then it'll, we'll do it together. And this week is a little bit different. I wanted to do more of a storytelling type session for all of you and just have it be, really chill and cruisy and open it up, especially since we have an intimate group today and it's obviously an intimate topic. So I've invited my friend Kristin in the cute star sweater. I'll put you on the main speaker mode.
Oh, I love my stars.
Yay.
It's like a blanket.
Yeah, it looks like a big cozy blanket.
Kind of like fantastic.
Yeah, if you guys want to put it on gallery view too, if you hover your mouse in the upper right hand corner, you can see everybody's tiles, which is kind of nice to see everybody's faces. But I asked Kristin to come on. She and I are actually colleagues. We both work in mental health. I think you guys have heard me talk about, a little bit about my job in mental health. And Kristin and I have been colleagues for several years now. Hi, Portia. Thanks for joining. And I learned that Kristin was, hi, Ame, was starting to work through COVID-19 and that this had impacted her. And so over the past now going on, 5-6 weeks, and I'll let you talk about your timeline, Kristin, it's just been hard as a friend to know that someone that you care about is impacted by this and trying to understand how you can provide support across the miles. I'm in California, Kristin's in Florida, and really only being able to check in and say, like, text and leave voicemails to say, how are you doing? What's going on this week? And I'm just so happy that she's in a place today where she could join us, where she's feeling good and feeling strong enough to even have this conversation and talk a little bit about some of the symptoms and just how it's impacted her lungs. And obviously, disclaimer, like, we know that every single one of these cases is so different, so unique, not meaning to give any medical advice or, everyone's case is just going to be so different. But my goal with having Kristin on today is that if any of the tools and the resources or the things that she's experienced can help any of us, whether it's ourselves or family members or friends that are impacted, that's my goal, is that these will just be tools that might be helpful for all of you. And especially, again, the emotional mental health journey that you go through, whether you're impacted by COVID and you're actually infected with it or you're not. I think we've all can attest to being on some kind of mental health journey through this process, right? And the most amazing thing is that Kristin has, she's just so courageous. She's been home alone. She's stayed home by herself. She's been able to thankfully work through it at home for the past 5 weeks. And I'm just like, I don't know how she's doing this. So it's a really interesting story. So thank you guys all for just being here as a community to support each other, hear Kristin's story. And, I'd love to open it up for any stories that you feel like you are willing or interested in sharing, or questions that you have for Kristin. So, Kristin, I will go ahead and turn it over to you. And again, disclaimer, Kristin's working on, she doesn't have full lung capacity. She looks amazing and you would never know, but she's still working through this virus. So if she needs to pause or take a break, Kristin, feel free, whatever you need. So.
Thanks, Stacy. Hi, everybody. I think I've been on a few calls with you guys before, so it's nice to see you again. And I'm Kristin. Nice to meet you guys. I am, or ladies, I am I guess you would say, a lifelong water woman. I spent my childhood growing up in Georgia, but my entire mom's side of my family has always lived in Florida. So I spent every summer in Florida, at the beach, in the waves. And once I found out, I work with Stacy, and once I found out Stacy was a surfer, I started listening to her podcast. So I've been listening for a while now. I've listened to at least 20 or 25 episodes. And those episodes, you guys, I'm sure some of you were on those episodes, but like those episodes are what inspired me to even take up surfing. I'm 47 and got on a surfboard at that age for the first time. So you're never too old to try a new thing. So I think in terms of being a surfer, just so you guys know, I'm more of like a floater at this point. Like I've never stood up on a board yet, but I've certainly paddled out and been out there 9-10 times already on different boards. And unfortunately the virus has obviously limited our ability to get back on our boards right now. But like there's so many metaphors for what I experienced trying to learn to surf and dealing with COVID. So I think there are a lot of analogies and metaphors and overlapping things. So right now so maybe I should back up and just tell you a little bit about my background, like you would on a podcast, Stacy. You ask people about their backgrounds and stuff, so you know what. Because I think when we get any kind of critical illness, or if we're helping anyone else with a critical illness, we're going to bring our own set of background, our own circumstances to how we deal with that event or that illness. So a little bit about my background. I've lived in 10 different states throughout my career. I've worked in healthcare for about 25 years. I think those two things are really important in terms of like how I dealt with this illness. My background also educationally, I have a master's degree in women's studies, and in critical studies. I used to teach at Ohio State University, sociology and critical studies and stuff like that. So I also brought to this whole illness and this whole pandemic so far kind of like a critical eye. Like any information that was fed to me, I didn't necessarily take it on its face, and I did my own sort of research and stuff before I would proceed. So that's just a little bit about my background to help you guys understand like how I have been at home now for 45 days with this illness. In terms of mental health, we're going to be talking a little bit about that, and I'm totally open to talking about that. And I think it's super important to destigmatize talking about the mental health issues that come up in a pandemic, much less having a disease like this or any other critical illness. So my mental health background has to do with mostly volunteering at first. I volunteered as a college student for domestic violence hotlines and crisis hotlines. I was an AIDS activist when AIDS first hit our nation. I was only around 16, but I was seeing what was going on, and I knew it was a lot of what was happening at the time was not fair and not right. And I come from a family of activists and social justice fighters. So I also come to this disease and to this time period understanding, like we just went through this as a country when the HIV and AIDS epidemic hit us not so long ago, only a couple of decades ago, even though the media is always talking about the flu pandemic of the 1900s. So there's that too. I don't know, that's a little background. I don't want to talk too much about that. So I guess, Stacy, do you want me to just go through the timeline of like the diagnosis and the symptoms? What would be helpful for you guys to know?
Yeah, perfect. Sorry, I was just muting a couple people. Heard a little background noise. I think that was really helpful, Kristin, just to tee up some of your background. I feel like every time I talk to you, I also learn something new about you, and like you have all these amazing layers to you of things you've done in the past and jobs that you've worked on and the analogies that you draw. And Yeah, I think, well, so when we were first chatting and before, I mean, obviously you can talk a little bit about the timeline, but you said that you thought, you just come down with a bug or the flu or a cold.
Mm-hmm.
And, what were kind of some of your early symptoms, and then how did you start to navigate, or at what point did you kind of realize it was COVID?
Yeah. So like, I'm the first person to say, first of all, I live in Florida, which was one of the last states to really accept that COVID was hitting America. We were a state that was kind of in denial. We had, and myself included, we had, our governor was reluctant, I think from, now looking back, he was reluctant to put any of the social distancing stuff in place early, like California did, for example. So I was living in a state and going about my business where in a part of the state, I live in South Florida, where we were getting an influx of spring break travelers from all over the world. We were hosting the Super Bowl, which I did not go to the Super Bowl, but I was definitely hanging out down in Miami around the time of the Super Bowl. So we were having people from all over the world in South Florida right before people started getting sick here. So there's no coincidence about that, right? So we know we probably should have shut down our state a little earlier. But anyway, all that being said, I was out in the world doing my thing. I love to do photography. I love to be at the beach. And around March 19th or 20th, during a work teleconference like this, I just started like having this dry cough out of nowhere. And I just kind of, as you do when you're working, you're thinking about your task at hand. And I just kind of blew it off as like, this is maybe a cold that's about to start happening or whatever. I didn't even think about COVID. The cough during the call kept getting progressively worse. So dry cough, that's one of the first symptoms that I had. And I guess it was bad enough to where one of my colleagues called me afterwards and said, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" And she was like, "Well, you were just hacking through that whole call." And I was like, "Oh, I think I'm okay. I think I have a cough or whatever." And then about 3 days later, I just started having really terrible fever, hot flashes, cold flashes, like chills, and increasing day by day, an increasing inability to breathe, which sucked because also I'm a registered yoga teacher. So that like breath, we know as yoga practitioners or teachers, like breath is life, right? So this was the first time in my life I was literally like losing my breath, just not doing anything, like sitting here losing my breath. So that is when I knew, like 3 or 4 days in, I knew I was probably in for something that was not, say, the flu or not like a cold. And so, yeah, like I was definitely watching the news by then, and I was seeing, what was happening with some of the first COVID cases. And I thought to myself, I probably am in for like what these people are experiencing in New York, say. So that was hugely scary. It was terrifying because at that point in time, I mean, I knew I was getting sick. I happened to be single for the first time in my life. I've literally always had a partner until now. And so I was literally at home, single with 2 dogs, and watching myself get this disease that people were talking about. Sorry, let me give them a treat. They're fighting. They want my attention. There you go.
I was wondering what that
Guys, I'm so sorry about my dog. That's the problem of being single. I can't like fawn them off on someone right now.
Kristin recently too just got a new puppy named Tucker, which I know you'll talk about in a minute, but just how actually having animals and especially a new puppy has actually been really helpful during this process. So
totally, highly recommended if you're single to have an animal, a cat, a dog, an iguana, whatever. We all need comfort, I think, during this time. So So yeah, my symptoms, I'm a lot better now, obviously, or I wouldn't be doing this call, but my symptoms just progressed over the next few days, to the point where I scheduled a telehealth consultation with my primary care doctor. His office had already closed due to the virus, so he was only doing telehealth appointments. And I got on the call with him and I was like, doc, I think I have COVID. And he kind of like looked at me like I was crazy, which was really also, in hindsight, like scary. It's scary when your doctor looks at you and doesn't validate what you think or know to be true for yourself. Like at this point in my life, this is how I look at adulthood, right? Like once you hit, say, 30, you've probably had a cold, you've probably had the flu, you've probably maybe had bronchitis, or maybe you've had pneumonia, or known someone who's had any of those 4 things. And the symptoms of this disease, for me, at least at first, were a lot like those symptoms, but not. There were so many different nuances. So in my heart, I felt like I've got this COVID thing that people are talking about. But my doctor was looking at me literally like on a call like this, like, are you sure? So I said, I don't know. I can't, there's no at that time we didn't have testing here either in Florida. So it was like anyone's guess, right? So I said, well, can you just what would you throw at me if I did have COVID? Like, I don't want to get off this call without whatever you would throw at me if I have COVID. So he said, well, I'm going to prescribe you an inhaler, a short-term inhaler. It's called albuterol. I actually have it here. And I'm going to prescribe you amoxicillin, which is an antibiotic. And I said, why the antibiotic? And he said, because if you do have COVID, we are seeing some cases that are turning from a viral infection into a bacterial infection. So if you start to get really bad, I want you to take the amoxicillin. So I was like, okay. So those are the 2 initial things that my doctor prescribed. We still did not have testing near me. And that's an issue that I think you probably, depending on where you live, right? Testing is either available or not available. And depending on who you are, testing is available or not available. So ironically, I live in the same county where our American president has his estate. I live in Palm Beach County, and we did not have testing at the time that I got sick in this county. So I just thought that was hugely ironic. So I literally was living with the disease for about 8 or 9 days, and just kind of self-treating myself with fluids and soups and hot teas. Yay, I got my tea. And all the meds my doctor had prescribed, and lots of rest. That's another thing, like the lack of oxygen you get when your breathing is impaired. I think it must do something. I'm not a doctor, but it must do something where it makes you want to sleep all the time. So I was like taking these, what I call epic naps. And I mean like a nap where you just can't not nap. Like you have to nap. Like, so your body just shuts down and you have to lay down, and then you don't know how long it's going to last. It could be a 2-hour nap. It could be like a 14-hour nap. So anyway, that was another symptom, was what I call epic napping. But
you also named your COVID.
Started to, yeah. Well, pretty much. I mean, I called it Voldemort, but I call anything bad in my life Voldemort. If it's really, really bad, I mean, I'm a Harry Potter fan, so like.
That's amazing.
And I think, that there are analogies in films for anything, like any hardship we face in life. There's all these analogies. So if you like Star Wars, then there's there's Darth Vader and there's the Force. And then if you like Harry Potter, there's Voldemort and there's Harry Potter, who's the good shining light. So, but definitely for me, COVID was this is the only critical illness I've ever had that laid me up as badly as COVID did. And I'm blessed, actually. I'm lucky. Like, I'm 47, and this is the first critical illness I've ever had. So I actually was trying to remind myself the whole time I was really, really sick that I was lucky that I had made it to 47. And I actually told my family at one point, like, if this goes south, I don't regret anything in my life, and I don't want to get emotional. It can make me get emotional because you're seeing things on the news or reading things about people having to go to ERs and not returning. So I had to come to some kind of self-reconciliation during this too, where this disease, like, it's like any other critical illness. It like makes you reevaluate your life and examine, like, are you okay with where you're at? Did you have any loose ends that you want to tie up just in case? Oh God, I feel like I'm talking about a lot. Do you guys have any questions so far? I can keep talking because, yeah, I have more story, but yeah, I just want to make sure you guys, if you have questions.
I think you can unmute yourselves too. If you can't, I'll unmute you, but please, yes, jump in with questions. I'd love, Kristin, again, if we could dig into, because we know that talking about the mental health side of anything is difficult for people to talk about, but thankfully, you and I are working in the industry, and we know we have to continue to be some of those voices to talk about it. And I know you said you were willing to share maybe some of the things that you experienced mentally during this time that was directly related to the virus.
Yeah. So, mentally being alone, like alone, not like with a husband in a different room or a parent or somebody in my house with me, like being alone was hugely stressful. Because there were times when I thought, what if something did happen to me? What if I, had this go to my heart, or what if I had this go to my brain and I just am alone? And so that was a huge challenge. I recommend right now making a plan for your families, whether you guys are alone or not, that you have like a buddy system set up in case COVID hits your household. And what I mean by that is have a system set up where if someone that is going to get this illness and is going to be alone with it, that they have people checking in on them every day. And so I did have a buddy system that kind of ad hoc'd itself into place. Like, I definitely had friends who checked in on me daily. Stacy was one of them. Thank you, Stacy. Just to make sure like I was okay. And that hugely helps the mental health aspect of the real isolation. Like, yes, we're all in social isolation right now. We're all in a state of quarantine right now. And that has a lot of mental health implications too. Like the incidence for depression to be higher, the incidence for loneliness to be higher, the incidence for anxiety to be higher is just in and of itself with a pandemic normal. So if you're feeling anxious right now, or if you've had little bouts of depression or what I would call like gloom and doom days, or like you feel like you're fighting Voldemort or something right now, that's, I would say, totally normal. Like if you're not having anxiety or little bouts of depression or grief, deep grief in the middle of a pandemic, I'm not sure when else you would have them. So I would say that's a totally normal thing. And
you're basically not human.
Yeah.
Some kind of, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. We're forget about my COVID, right? But as a world right now, we're in a state of, I think, collective grief.
Yeah.
We're grieving so much. We're grieving, little things like I can't go to the beach right now because it's on lockdown. We're grieving the loss of, that hundreds of thousands of millions of lives, or is it up to 1 million now? Millions of lives. We're grieving our jobs lost. We're grieving our family members being sick. We're grieving so much. We're grieving what was, because we don't know what lies ahead, but it's totally human, I think, and normal and natural to grieve what was, and also be scared of be scared of the not knowingness of what's ahead, because nobody knows what's ahead at this point. So,
yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Kristin. It's interesting because I hadn't thought about it before when Australia was having all their fires earlier in the year, I was doing this podcast with this woman, Renee, and she, like you, is just an activist. And she actually went down, if you guys, I don't know if you listen to her podcast, is incredible, but she went down to the Amazon and stayed down there for like 3 months and ended up doing this like total immersion, just kind of getting, she lived up in Santa Barbara outside of Los Angeles. And she's like, I felt like I took my first breath at 20 years old. Like, what have I been doing the first 20 years of my life? And then, but she made a comment about grief. And when we were talking about the Australia fires, because I was like, I just can't, I was distraught. I just would cry. I couldn't watch the news, just seeing it, just that one image of the continent, just all red on fire. And when we were talking about it, she's like, we weren't designed to like hold the grief of the world. And we, back in the day when we lived in our communities or our villages or our tribes or whatever, you might take in the grief of that tribe or that community that you're in. But now with like the news and just everything so exposed, like you're literally holding the grief of the entire world inside. And like our bodies and our minds we were not designed to hold that much grief. And there was a really good article, I can't remember if it was New York Times or who published it, but it was around that. And it was like, if you're trying to figure out what feeling you're feeling, it's likely grief, with COVID. So I'm just grateful that you called out all of those things and that just normalizing it. It's normal for all of us to feel all these things. And I think we're all feeling that roller coaster of we'll have better days and things are feeling good. And you're like, okay, I got this. I'm holding on. And then the next day it's just like a light switch and you're just down for the count. So it'll continue to be like that I think for a little while, especially as we just don't know. I think we're all anticipating this is going to be a little while and there's different waves that are going to happen, but I'm glad you called that out. I actually got a couple great questions too, Kristin, in the chat.
Okay.
So Heather, great question. She said, when you have reflection in your life, have you made any changes since? Also, how long did it last?
Yeah. So the biggest change that I made in my life so far, and there will be more to come, but so I've had this now for 45 days. I could talk about testing, but anyway, the last test I had was about 2 weeks ago and I tested negative. So technically right now I'm just recovering from the remnants of the disease and I'm not able to pass it on to anyone right now. But so the biggest change that I made in my life was to start to eliminate the people from my life that, especially during this disease, were not going to be productive to talk to. And that has to be done really delicately, right? Because so I mean the biggest thing I did during the disease was I just protected my energy. And I can't just credit myself for that. I actually can credit your podcast, Stacy, for that technique, because I remember listening to Nix Joubert talk about when she was diagnosed with cancer and having to eliminate some of the negativity in the people in her life in order to like combat the critical illness. When you're critically ill, you do not have time for other people's negativity or their fear or whatever. You're fighting your battle. So I think one of the changes I made was just setting those people either aside temporarily or making a plan to set them aside permanently. Also, the change I made was not tuning into the media as much as I would normally do. I checked in with the media maybe once every 3 days just to see what was going on. So I would know for myself, like, okay, what is happening with this disease? Because I want to be ready for whatever is next. But I definitely did not consume as much media as I did. And then the other weird change that ended up happening is this thing affects your brain. I mean, it affected my brain. I'll say that, right? So there were nights when I was just so full of creativity and I don't know how to put it. Like there were nights when I would literally be up painting, of all things, just to paint. I mean, my brain wanted to paint, so I was like, okay, let's go with that. So I made these weird accidental changes because your brain is affected in some way from this disease. And then the other thing I did also was do my estate planning. So if you haven't done your estate planning, I mean, that's a really practical, boring thing to consider and kind of scary too. And that brings grief, by the way. It's totally normal to think of like, oh my God, I got to do my will. I got to do my healthcare power of attorney and update that. Like those are things that are no fun. No one wants to sit down and do them, but this is a time that calls for that too.
Wow.
Those are some of the key changes.
Interesting. Yeah. What kind of resources did you use to do that, Kristin? Did you just like hop on Google for the estate planning, or did you call our EAP?
I know. Well, if you work for an employer that has what's called an employee assistance program, you definitely could use your EAP to do that kind of work. I myself happen to use LegalZoom. Not being paid to say that. Yeah. But like there's lots of online applications that make doing estate planning easy and affordable. And especially now when you can't even go into an attorney's office, like I think these virtual programs are super helpful and they're not very expensive. I think it probably depends on the complexity of your situation. Like it's a lot easier for me to do estate planning than it would be a family with 8 kids or something. So, but yeah, that's what I did. Yeah. Also in every state in America, we've got what we call bar associations. So you can look up your state bar associations and they usually have free legal referral lines. So you can find attorneys who would talk to you about that kind of thing through your bar association. Sorry about my dog, you guys. They're so
What about they want the spotlight. What about the dogs? Tell us about, you told me specifically, and actually this goes hand in hand.
Segue, right?
Yeah, this is a good segue, but this goes because we were oh, Tucker. He's so cute.
He's the puppy. Say
oh my God. I got to take a screenshot of this. He's adorable. He's so fuzzy. Cute.
He's a little surfer. You guys see my funny foamy, by the way? There it is.
Mom. What are you looking? Oh, your foamy? Yeah, I love it. Someone asked, Erica asked more about what kept you from going into the ER and like going into the hospital. You kind of felt the pull that staying home was the right thing. How did you make that decision?
Thank you, Erica, for asking me that. One of the problems with this disease is brain fog. I told Stacy that, that's a great reminder, because I wanted to talk about what made me make that decision. So 2 things. One is the dogs, right? And if I were a single mom, I'd be here saying the kids. So I'm single. I have family around me in Florida, but there were times when I thought, God, this is probably the night I got to go to the ER. It got that bad. I had no idea like what I would, what my readings would have been if I had gone to the ER, but I just felt bad enough to go to the ER. But then I thought, I don't want to leave the dogs at a boarding facility because it's a freaking pandemic. And like what happens at a dog boarding facility during a pandemic? We did not know whether or not pets could get COVID at this point yet. So I did not want to expose them to other dogs. And then, frankly, I didn't want to pawn 2 dogs, including a puppy, off on my family. So, I mean, and then the other thing is my primary care doctor from the very first conversation we had said to me, try to avoid the hospital as much as possible. Like, unless you literally cannot breathe at all, try to avoid going to the ER. And this is important. I'm so glad you asked this question and we didn't skip over this. The reason he said that is because he knew, at that time, back 5 weeks ago, we weren't, the ERs were not equipped to understand this disease, right? The medical profession was just learning about the disease. So how do you go get treatment for a disease where no one knows how to treat you? And then B, he knew, and he didn't say this, but I'm inferring because I know my doctor really well, like he had probably read some of the literature, seeing how everyone that was admitted to an ER at that point was being put on a ventilator if they couldn't breathe. And what ventilators do is they take away your own ability to use your muscles to breathe. I mean, they're great tools if you need them, but what he was saying to me was literally like, don't go, because that's probably what they'll do to you. And in the end, that may not have been what you need. And then, so there's the medical aspect. And then my healthcare experience was really helpful to me here. And I'm so thankful I had that experience in work in healthcare, because I know that the quality of healthcare that you will receive across the globe varies by where you live, right? We all sort of intuitively know this, but the data definitely also shows this. So having lived in 10 different states, I can unequivocally say I don't trust the system of healthcare where I live right now. Whereas if I had COVID in another state, for example, like North Carolina, I think has an excellent healthcare system. So if I had COVID in North Carolina, sign me up. I probably would have gone to the hospital and figured out what to do with the dogs. But in Florida, I've seen too many bad outcomes from people I love coming into and out of hospitals, and I did not want to be one of those people. So I thought, I couldn't drive when you are that sick, at least for me. Like at that point in time, I could not drive, say, to a better place to get care. And then because you're infectious, you don't want to ask someone to drive you. You don't want to expose someone to the virus. So you're literally, it's such a weird conundrum to find yourself in, to have an illness and not be able to ask anyone to be near you for help. Because by them being near you to help you, you're exposing them to the thing that could potentially kill them. So we're at a really unique moment in history. It's a hot mess.
Yeah.
But
you mentioned your neighbors were really helpful, right? When you first learned, or you were even before you knew or officially had the test sign off, they would drop things for you and keep you stocked with soups and stuff.
Yeah. So one thing I would say too is don't forget about other people's mental health. You're reminding me to say, don't forget about other people that you love and their mental health. Like if you get sick or someone in your family gets sick, like other people are going to be worried about you. Like, and that affects their mental health. So one of the things I did is we have a very friendly community where I live. I'm friends with most of my neighbors, and I was texting my neighbors, not daily, but regularly, to let them know, like, I'm okay, I'm alive. Like my family members that were worried, I was texting them and talking to them, letting them know I was okay. So remember, their mental health is also at stake if you're critically ill or sick. So since I could not go out to shop for myself, I mean, this is the other thing. Like if you're a type A person like me, who is in the history of my life, I have not liked asking for help. It's hard for me to ask for help. This is the one experience in my life where I could not forego not asking for help. Like you have to ask for help. So, and I count that now as a gift that this disease gave me. The ability to ask for help and be vulnerable and say, you know what, I can't do this by myself. It's going to take a village. So I asked my neighbors to drop off stuff in my garage, anything from soup to groceries to whatever. And they did. My family and my neighbors would leave me little things, medicine, soup, you name it, whatever I needed, they were there to support me. So one thing we can all do when we're healthy is do the same in return for our communities.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Kristin. You also found a great resource online, and there's a couple questions in the chat too, which I'll get to, but I want to make sure I don't forget about this resource you found on Facebook. And this is also one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you here today, is because all we see really are the headlines on the news and the total death count, and we aren't necessarily getting these more personal stories of people who have survived it, and what did that look like and what was that journey like. But this resource you found online is really great for that, for people that might want to connect there. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I was so desperate one day with the depression. I mean, there was one day with the depression where I thought it would not be such a bad deal if I just slipped away. And honestly, it's the dogs that kept me really, really fighting in that regard. I mean, you've got to have something that you're fighting for, whatever it is. But yeah, the depression got so bad that I went on Google, thank God for Google, and I Googled something like COVID, how long does it take to survive COVID? Because I wanted to know how long I had to hang in there for. And I Googled like COVID survivors, are there any out there? Just anything. And what happened is one of the first things that came up, there wasn't a lot that came up at that time. There's probably more now. But a couple of weeks ago, what came up was this New York Times article that a woman named Fiona Lowenstein had written. And she had recently recovered or tested negative for COVID after a battle with it for 3 weeks. And she had written this opinion piece in the New York Times that said, we've got to talk about what COVID recovery looked like, because she was still sick, even though she was negative. So she had taken it upon herself to start an international online, we should have her on this podcast. She had taken it on herself to start an international online support group for COVID survivors. And I thought, thank God, Fiona, whoever you are, I still haven't met you. But she started this support group on an app called WhatsApp, which you probably all know about. And I hopped on there, and lo and behold, there were just people constantly. It was like being in a chat room, if you remember what those were like. But there were just people from, you guys, calm down. There were people from all over the world, because it was international, posting about their experiences at home with COVID. Everything from like what their symptoms were to how long in they were. And I started to realize that COVID patients were forming a language around this disease. They were calling themselves by days, right? They would be like, I'm day 22 in, I'm day 26 in, I'm 60 days. Is that normal? Is there anyone on here who's had this for 60 days? I'm out of the ER, but I have this symptom or that symptom. What are you guys doing for that? Or I saw on the news, now it could be, you could get blood clots from this disease. So should we all be wearing compression socks? Like, these are things that were popping up in this group. And I was just like, holy moly. But honestly, the biggest benefit of the group was just knowing that you're not, I wasn't alone with it. So hopefully more of these groups are popping up locally. I did do some research, and I noticed some hospital systems are starting to form like local recovery resources and groups like that. But at the time, this was the only group. It still exists. It's migrated to the Slack app. But you can still Google like Fiona Lowenstein and probably find the link and connect on the Slack app. Or you can go to my Facebook page, where I've made everything public, and you'll see the history there of the support group information. But that having a support network for anything like this is definitely something that helps improve your sense of isolation and mental health, for sure. Just knowing I wasn't alone.
Thanks, Kristin. Sasha had a great question around, how did you find out you actually had it? When was the test finally made available to you?
Yeah, good question. Ooh, so what happened was, since Stacy and I work in healthcare, I thought to myself, like 7 days into having this disease, I thought, I have to have a test for this. My thought was, I need a test for this because I wanted to take off of work. I was still trying to work with this disease, and I would be able to work like 2 hours here, 4 hours there. And my boss was kind of like, are you okay? And I was like, I don't know. So I wanted to have a test to know what I was dealing with, so that if I needed to take off work, I would have the documentation for myself and my employer. I was fortunate enough to still have a job, and still am, but like, we did not have a testing facility here until I was like 7 or 8 days in, 10 days in, 7 or 8 days in, I went on Facebook, and you can see on my Facebook page, I asked my Facebook community if they knew of any testing resources. Like literally my global Facebook community, I posted, I did not want to have to say this because I still didn't know what stigma would be attached to COVID at the time. Like I did not want to have to identify myself as a possible COVID patient because like we still don't know what stigma will be attached to that. But like I thought, whatever, I'm at my wit's end. So I self-admitted I think I have COVID. Does anyone out there in healthcare know where I can get a test? Could you mail me a test? Do you know of a healthcare system that has testing? And my thought was, I want to find that out for me, but also for my area. Like I was going to literally call the governor and be like, yeah, so this pharma manufacturer has a test that's ready to go. Why aren't we offering it in this area? So I took a test. Finally, a testing site opened up like 3 days after my plea for help. People were like, oh, well, you can go down to Miami and be tested. Well, Miami is an hour and 15 minutes on a good day away from me. And I couldn't drive that far for that long. So I had to wait for a testing site to be near me. So I went for my test probably 10 or 11 days into being sick, which sucks because then you have to wait another, at least where I live, 6 days to get your results back. So by the time I got my positive results back, I was well into 2 weeks of being sick.
That's
that
crazy.
Question?
Yeah, that's crazy.
So when you hear people saying we need to make testing more accessible, this is one of the reasons they're saying it is because you've got to have some way of knowing what you're diving. You've got to have some way of knowing what you're dealing with in order to fight it. Mm-hmm. And if you can't test for it,
How long ago did you get the other test that showed you were now negative?
So then about 3 weeks in, and so one of the things that happens with this, for me anyway, is I would have really good days where I thought, I am better, hallelujah, I am healthy as a horse and ready to go back to work. And so you have these weird days where you're totally fine, like no symptoms, and you're like, thank you, God. And so on one of my good days, my cousin said, hey, why don't you go get retested and just make sure the virus is out of your system? And I thought, okay. So I called my county again, my city again, and I scheduled a test. By the way, you could be met with resistance if you're younger, depending on where you live. Like I faced a lot of resistance, even to getting access to testing, because we have a lot of elderly people down in South Florida, and they're the priority for testing down here since we have a shortage of test kits. So I had to make a lot of arguments with my screeners on the telephone to get tested in the first place. So be your own advocate and fight for yourself. You deserve a test no matter what age you are, whatever. You deserve a test if you think you're sick. So got the second test like maybe 3.5 weeks into being sick, got my results back like 5 days later. So now 4 weeks into being sick, I find out I'm negative, supposedly. And I say supposedly because I have not been retested, but I still have symptoms. And I don't know, my doctor said that I'm now seeing a pulmonologist. It took me 3 weeks to get into a pulmonologist. So I'm seeing a pulmonologist via telehealth, and he says most of the COVID cases he's seeing at home are what he calls long recovery cases. Like it's not something like the flu or the cold where it kind of goes away in 2 or 3 weeks. Like you should consider it a critical illness. If you've had it pretty badly in your lungs or in your heart or in wherever you get it, you should expect those organs to continue to be affected for a while, unfortunately. So
good to know. To
that end, my pulmonologist then, knowing that, my pulmonologist gave me what's called a long-acting inhaler for my lungs. It's an inhaler that you use twice a day, and it clears out your lungs a little bit better than the short-acting inhalers. So I'm using that. I can talk about all the other stuff that I'm taking or using as tools for my health, but that's one of them.
Thanks, Kristin.
Did I answer your question? I'm sorry, brain fog is still big.
No, you're doing amazing. You never even know you were down for the last 5 weeks. Heather and Jen had a couple questions around just in terms of how Florida is now. Have things improved in Florida? Are people taking this more seriously and staying home? You know, you're seeing the photos of packed beaches and parks and lack of social distancing. And Jen says, you know, after surviving COVID, you know, how does that feel? That's got to be kind of frustrating.
Okay. So I went through a phase, honestly, during COVID where I got a little judgy because I was sick and tired. And I would see my neighbors walking outside and not social distancing. Like I still do. So they're a lot better. I have a lot of windows in my apartment. So I would see them not social distancing, and I would sit there on my couch and be all judgy, like, why aren't you social distancing? I'm in here sick and you're affecting, you know, like in some way this affects me and this affects everybody. And I do think social distancing is the number one way to stop the spread. I'm totally on board with that. What was the question again?
Just have you seen any improvements in Florida?
Yeah, improvement.
Yeah.
Okay, so improvement. So yes. So since then, since that was happening, like say 2 or 3 weeks ago when people still weren't social distancing, I've seen a radical change, at least where I live, and I can only speak for where I live in Florida, which is the southern tip of Florida, where people are doing what you're supposed to be doing. My neighbors are now wearing masks. They are socially distancing. No one's congregating. But I would still say that I've seen pictures from my friends who live here who are out and about. And I have seen pictures of people in South Florida who are not social distancing. We have had a problem where, for example, the mayor, I think, in Jacksonville, which is about 3 hours north of me, took away all the social distancing guidelines on the beaches and stuff. And so there are new pictures from northern Florida where people are at the beach, which is lovely. I would like to be at the beach, but they're not socially distanced. So that's the challenge, is getting humans to, how do we do social distancing, but also reopen our businesses, especially our small businesses and our parks and our oceans and all that stuff. How do you do it? How do you do it in a place like LA, which is so congested with people? It's very difficult to do. So one of the things that I've learned too with the illness is I need to stop being judgmental, right? Like the disease has taught me to not judge. It's taught me to be really, really soft with people. Like maybe my neighbors weren't social distancing in the beginning because they were in some state of denial, or maybe they had COVID and I didn't know it and they were over it. I don't know. Who am I to judge anyone else? So at this point in time, like I've learned the disease has taught me to release any kind of resentment or judgment or anything like that, but just to notice like, oh, that person's not socially distancing. Well, I will choose to socially distance from them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but, that's beautiful. That's a good reminder, I think, regardless, right? And not only are we keeping ourselves safe and our friends and family and neighbors, but also continuing to try to honor those on the front line, the healthcare workers that are putting their lives at risk every single day. And you socially distancing and choosing to stay home is impacting them one way or the other. And I want to just give a shout out to Portia, who is calling in from Europe, one of our own heroes. She's a physician associate and works at the hospital there, and has been on the front lines every day. I'm getting emotional talking about it, but we're super grateful for everything you're doing, Portia. I know I can't even imagine how difficult things must be for you, and even to be on this, having this conversation today, and when it's your everyday, we're grateful to have you be part of this community. So thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah. Deep thanks. Mm-hmm. Deep thanks. Oh my gosh.
Well, I know we've got about couple minutes left, but does anyone else have any questions or anything that you want to share? I think you guys can unmute yourselves if you want to share anything. Maybe Kathy's going to unmute herself. She looks like she, or
No, I'm just typing.
Oh, okay. Does anyone have anything they want to share? Thank you for your questions along the way, by the way. Super, super helpful.
It's Ame. I just wanted to thank you for sharing your story. I wrote a lot of notes. I just like to take notes during these things because it helps me come back to it. And I just want to thank you for the collective grief note and letting us know that this is completely normal. So I appreciate that.
Thanks, Ame.
Yeah, Ame. So grief, I actually went through a period in my life where I lost 2 loved ones at once, and I found this amazing grief advocate. Her name is Megan Devine, Devine. I hope I'm spelling that right. Megan. And Megan runs online support groups on Facebook for people who have lost loved ones. And they are the most amazing support groups ever. I've had a couple family members take those courses. And Megan, even if you don't take her courses, follow her on social media or whatever you want to do, because she is such an amazing grief specialist. If there was ever a specialty to be in, she normalizes grief. She helps you have perspective when you've lost someone. And unfortunately, I think that at some point we're all going to be touched by this in a way where we lose something or someone, right? Where we lose someone. I hate to have to say it, but so we need to be prepared for heavy grief. And if we, and so her stuff is a really good resource for that. And also the local, there's also local grief counselors who specialize in grief and loss in any area, anywhere where you find therapy, there will be people who specialize in grief and loss, and that can work with you one-on-one.
I think she has a podcast too, Kristin. It looks like I just pulled up her link.
Yeah.
Refuge in Grief, I think.
Refuge in Grief.
Yep, yeah. If anyone wants to check that out.
Yeah. So what I love about following her is she'll put these little posts out on Instagram or wherever that say things like just basic stuff like, it's normal to both want things to go back to normal and be totally frightened of things going, she just normalizes all your conflicting feelings. And it's just nice to have a voice out there sort of mirroring what every one of us is collectively, consciously or subconsciously thinking. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Jen had a note to said, I have to look up the specific acupuncture points. I want to say 27, but it's so helpful if you are deeply empathetic, feel energy to release the collective grief and pain.
Ooh, yes. We didn't even get into all the alternative treatment methods, right? I have my friend who's a nurse sent me, she's also a holistic healer, and she sent me an elixir, which has helped me greatly. And it has,
what's in it? Yeah.
I'm going to tell you these herbs, right? Because I know you guys are also into holistic healing, but it really has helped me. It is a formula that has lomadium, licorice, skullcap. That doesn't sound very healing, but it is. And yerba santa. So lomadium, licorice, skullcap, and yerba santa. And I don't know the exact blend, but if you message me, I will connect you with her.
Cool.
She's a fantastic critical care nurse and used to also be in hospice. So she's definitely seen people at their worst and was kind enough to make that for me. And I've noticed a difference for sure.
You said, is it a tincture or elixir, like a liquid that you
It's a tincture. It's a tincture. She mixed it with some kind of alcohol base. I forget which alcohol base. But the alcohol, as we know, it gets into your system. It helps the herbs get into your system faster.
Mm-hmm. I've worked with skullcap. I was blending my own teas, and there's a evening recipe that calls for skullcap. So it's the first time I'd heard of it, and I'm like, oh, this is an interesting herb.
I know. It's so funny when I opened it, I was like, skullcap.
Yeah.
That's not what I want right now. I trusted her and it worked.
Oh, yeah, that's great.
Things I would say, you guys, I know we're going to run out of time, but a pulse oximeter, I get this wrong. So Portia probably knows better what this is called. Pulse oximeter, right? Okay, pulse oximeter.
That's right. Yeah.
So this little device I didn't get until I was like 3 or 4 weeks in. I wish I had had it from the beginning. But it measures your heart rate and your pulse ox, how much oxygen is getting into your blood. And frighteningly, when I got this and I stuck my finger in, my pulse ox was anywhere from 90 to 92, and this little stupid thing would beep and scare the crap out of me. But so my doctor said 90 to 92, I can still be at home with that, right? But if it fell below 90, I should be concerned. Portia, I don't know what you think about that, but like, so
yeah, that's right on the edge. Yeah,
I think right on the edge, man.
Yeah.
Right on the edge. But what I found is if I did the breathing exercises, you guys, that Nick's taught you guys, this group a couple weeks ago, if I did those breathing exercises or any that you see online from respiratory therapists or that you learned in yoga class, you can literally have this pulse ox thing on your finger and do those exercises, and you will see your oxygen level go up. If you're not critical, right? So on the days when it was pretty low initially, I would just let myself do the breathing exercises, and it would help raise my pulse ox back to a normal, acceptable level and stop this thing from beeping. But the beeping is to warn you you're on the edge there. So I would say have that at home. It's not expensive. It's helpful for your family. And then a thermometer you need, and then some ibuprofen, a pre and probiotic, because this is a disease that can also affect your gut health. And so pre and probiotics protect your stomach, your gut, your digestive tract. And then the other thing is you need as much oxygen as possible. So the one last thing I would recommend is either a Neti Pot or a simile thereof, which mine is this NeilMed Neti Pot system. And what you can do with that is clean out your nasal passages. It's kind of gross, but you can Google it and see how it works. But you clean out your nasal passages every day so that you're able to breathe fully as much as you can and get as much good oxygen into your body as you can.
You're talking to the right crew, because as surfers, we use Neti Pots. At least we do here in LA.
Good.
Yeah.
As yogis, we do too.
Yeah.
So, okay.
That's good.
I literally remember the first time my yoga teacher mentioned Googling a Neti Pot. I was horrified. I was like, what? You want me to do that to my nose? But now I'm a big fan.
I love all those visuals. Thank you, Kristin, and all the tangible things that people can have in their back pocket proactively, just to kind of know your body, right? And these are new things we're learning about our bodies that maybe we haven't had to pay attention to before, but just knowing some of the things that maybe we can control or feel like you can help yourself and have some of those tools are really, really huge. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Know your body, have a buddy system, advocate for yourself. You are your own best advocate and your family's best advocate, right? So in a lot of areas, this is, the pandemic is taking more resources than is imaginable. So if you're in one of those areas where the pandemic is taking a lot of resources and doctors are overexhausted and nurses are overexhausted, you also have to be part of their thought process and collaborate with them on your care. And the best way to do that is to be informed, like for your family or for yourself. Like help your nurses help you, help your doctors help you.
Absolutely. Well, you just talked for over an hour, and so I would say your lung capacity is greatly improved. You did amazing.
You guys, this is the long-acting inhaler that I have, and it has changed my life in the last week.
Wow.
Like, it's called Wixella. And then I thought, well, why didn't I get this from the beginning? That's the problem, right? Like, why didn't I get this from the beginning? Because this one is the one that made the difference. So if you get this in your lungs, maybe this could help you too. It's called Wixella. I don't work for them either. And it says 250/50. And it's a long-acting inhaler. And it has definitely Like I literally could not inhale fully. I could only inhale maybe to 70% of my lung capacity throughout this whole process until I got that inhaler. And that inhaler has brought me up to like 90, 95%, I think. So
that's good to know. Portia, are you seeing those?
I had it from the beginning.
Yeah. I'm curious, Portia, are you seeing those inhalers being beneficial in Europe too?
So, well, I've seen really, really sick people. So they're kind of beyond the inhaler stage, but yeah, I think people are being discharged from hospital with the short-acting and the long-acting inhalers, both of them, just to like kind of try and get you at home and just building up the lung capacity again, like Kristin's been saying. But it's the steroids in the long-acting one that is reducing all the inflammation in the lungs. And then when you start to get on top of that, I think you can start to progress. So I think that's probably, what's going on. Just, but yeah, so yeah, it's really useful. Yeah.
Is the, Erica wants to know, is the inhaler by prescription only, or is that something you can get over the counter?
For me, it's prescription.
Yeah.
Prescription, yeah.
I think it probably will vary by your country, right? Or I don't know, but for me, it was prescription.
Okay. Amazing.
So I guess another lesson learned medically would be, I mean, if I had to go back in time, I would have asked my primary care doctor for a long-acting inhaler from the beginning instead of a short-acting inhaler, which really didn't do too much. It helped a little, but not nearly as much as the long-acting one.
Yeah. I think that they would have probably done the short-acting just to see, you know, if you were someone that wasn't suffering with COVID so severely, you may well have got over the bump with it, but it sounds like because it, you know, you had quite a severe illness that you would definitely have needed the long-acting one. But I guess it's the first thing they would have given you is just the short-acting.
Yeah.
And then monitored.
They were more conservative, and then they got more. Yeah, totally. So another thing I would say is, like, I got super lucky because I have this thing at work called short-term leave, where you can take leave and still go back to work after you're done being healed. And not everyone is going to have that luxury either. So I guess, you know, whatever the circumstances are in your own family, you know, be prepared. Like if you or anyone in your family does get sick, this is unfortunately something that could be a 2-week thing or a multiple month thing, or it just varies so greatly. So just be prepared.
Thanks, Kristin. Thank you, everybody. I know we're a couple minutes over, but I appreciate you hanging on. And Kristin, so grateful for your bravery and sharing your story today with everyone. And it's probably like you're processing this as you're even talking about it, because it's still so fresh, right? And every week is different and like a new milestone, but super grateful for everyone being part of this community and showing up for each other and just being supportive, and for your questions today. And I love seeing you all on Sunday mornings. It's something I greatly look forward to. So thank you for that. And Kristin, we're so glad that you're doing well and healthy and continuing to persevere and push through.
I think I can safely say I'm on the upswing now.
Yep. Absolutely. And I'm going to go ahead and turn this into a YouTube episode. So if you know anyone that might benefit from hearing Kristin's story, please feel free to pass that along as well.
Thank you, you guys. Everyone stay safe, stay distanced. Thank you, Portia. Thank you. All right.